Welcome to the Better Sex Podcast. My name is Deborah Catt, and I am your shameless host. This is the Better Sex Podcast, where we have unfiltered conversations about sex and relationships. These conversations are frank and explicit and may not be appropriate for all audiences, so please listen with care. I truly believe that a sexy world creates a happier and a safer world. If you want to do your part in creating a safe and sexy world, please hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Today, we are going to dive into the world of my guest, Dr. Matt. He is a professional speaker and clinical psychologist who specializes in working with neurodivergence. That's gifted, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and so much more. Dr. Matt specializes in taking knowledge of the brain, human behavior, and clinical psychology and making that accessible and practical for people to improve their lives, their sex, and their relationships. He's the co-founder of the Neurodiversity Collective and the author of the Neurodivergency Playbook. How neurodivergent people can crack the code of living in a neurotypical world. I hope I got all that right. Welcome, Dr. Matt. I am very excited to have this conversation with you. First question, how did you get here?
Well, I mean, one of the best things about my job, right, is that therapy is a space where you can talk about a lot of the things you can't necessarily talk about in quote unquote polite society, right? And there was an old podcast called Death, Sex, and Money, where they're like, we can talk about the things that you can't talk about other places. I'm like, that's my job though, right? Like I have those conversations with people. So, I mean, it is holding space to have those conversations is a vital part of building relationships, but also building like the internal skills necessary to have those relationships. So I often say to my clients, like, listen, let me be your crash test dummy. Practice the things you want to say to other people to me, because I'm going to give you that feedback. I'm not going to be scared off. And we're going to craft what sounds like this, the most authentic you together.
I love that you bring practice in to the conversation right away, because I think one of the things that I see with my clients is they're so afraid to make a mistake. Yeah. And so we don't have places to practice. We don't have ways in which we can try things out. And, that really is the way that we learn new skills and learn how to be better at them. So,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, and one of the traps that we fall into a lot when you're serving neurodivergent people is that neurodivergent people develop asynchronously, right? They're out of sync. So you might be someone who's 20 years old and intellectually you're 28, academically you're 29, chronologically you're 20, emotionally you're 17, and socially you're 15. So how are you supposed to find community? How are you supposed to get your needs met when you're essentially 5 different people, right? And in gifted psychology, we call this the rule of 5, right? Because, you might be able to have academic discourse with, a professor at a university, but then when that conversation turns into like, what do you want from your career? The 15-year-old party is like, ha, 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 fart joke. And it's like, oh no. And it can feel almost impossible to wrangle all of those things together to prevent a unified front. So like, it's really hard to, as Scott Barry Kaufman always says, we contain multitudes, but it's really hard to get those multitudes to work together.
So how do you get all of those parts and peoples and to work together?
I think it all starts from a place of self-knowledge. Like I always say that a lot of people in the world are walking around thinking that they're zebras. I'm thinking that they're horses, or specifically weird horses, when they're actually zebras. Because like zebras and horses look a lot alike, right? They might seem like they need similar things, but a zebra is going to be happiest getting things a zebra needs. And if you've been walking around your whole life thinking that, well, how come I look like a horse, I sound like a horse, I grew up around other horses, but I'm not succeeding with the things that those horses are getting? Well, it might just be because you're a zebra. And understanding that you're different and understanding what those differences mean allows you to create a whole new life path that is going to be much more likely to be successful in giving you the things you want and need so you can be happy.
So we kind of jumped in, and I'm going to step us back for just a second because the word neurodivergent, it feels like it's in a lot of different places. And if I'm truly honest, I'm not exactly sure what what it really means. So would you mind taking a minute and telling us what is neurodivergency?
Absolutely. And thank you for you. We did dive right in, right? It's good to level set. So you so you could define a neurodivergent brain as a brain that does things unexpected, right? It does not function as we would expect a brain to do so based on some of these age station of life. So the brains that do are called neurotypical brains, right? So a neurotypical brain functions largely as a brain would expect, as you'd expect it to. About 80% of people are neurotypical, right? Their brains function like we'd expect them to. That they develop synchronously. They're 20 years old, socially, emotionally, academically, intellectually, personally, they're just 20 years old. Neurodivergent people, about 1 in 5 or 20% of the population, their brains grow up in some fundamentally different way. And the reason I talked about that asynchrony is that there's only so much developmental energy to go around in the brain, right? So you have 100% developmental energy, normally goes spreads equally among those 5 domains that we talked about before. But when you're neurodivergent, intellectual might get 35% and academic might get 30%. So now instead of everything getting 20%, now we've got 35% to split among 3 developmental areas: social, emotional, and physical. So this is where a lot of my clients who can hang intellectually with the brightest and the best are also people who are quick to get their feelings hurt and shut down, or people who can't navigate a complicated social relationship because developmentally speaking, they're not in the same place. But it's really important to ground all this work in neuroscience because there are still people out there who think ADHD is just too much sugar or too much TikTok, right? There are still people out there who think autism is badism. There are still people out there who think that dyslexia is kids just not trying to read. And when I can sit in a room and show some brain slides and say, this is what this stuff looks like, gang, I feel like we are raising the floor of the conversation for all these people and starting from the same place.
I really in your book you talk about, I mean, the title is about having a code. And in your book you talk about feeling like the rest of the world has a secret or a code and somehow you were left out.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting analogy in terms of understanding how socially we come in at different places and how sometimes, you know, sometimes you're like the phrase, they can't read the room.
Yeah.
Or, things like that. And from what I'm gathering, it sounds like that's as much a brain function and a way of being as it is a skill to be learned. Am I understanding that right?
I think you nailed it, right? And one of the things that's foundationally important there is, I love the language that we stumbled on there because, I would come home from school and say to my mom, like, did everybody just have like a meeting? Did everybody have a conversation? Did they get an email? Like, why does everybody seem to know the new rules of being social as an 8th grader, that are not the same rules that they were when you were a seventh grader. And I was so just knocked off kilter by that because, being a very smart and sensitive person, I was aware that things were shifting, but there were so many unwritten rules that I couldn't parse that together, and I couldn't put that together. So, you're in situations where like you're feeling anxious socially, which causes you to act atypically. When you act atypically, people react weirdly, which makes you more anxious, which makes you more likely to act strangely. When I was a school counselor, I could always tell when my kids had crushes on other kids because they were acting super weird, right? Like, hey, do you like earthworms? Me neither. Bye. And they would run. No one was talking about earthworms, Derek. Why are you yelling about earthworms? He's like, I don't know. She's so pretty. Right. And that's, but when you think about, those unwritten rules and those social environments, right? We have these things in our brain called mirror neurons, right? Mirror neurons are, we're social creatures. So they monitor other people's social behavior, right? So if they're doing a thing, your brain does a version of that thing. Your brain's like, should I be doing this too? Right. So when I teach classes, I'm like, so mirror neurons, like for instance, I'm thirsty. I'm going to have a drink and I'll take a big sip of my drink. And then everybody in that room who's thirsty go like subconsciously reaches their water and they look like, what am I doing? Are you a witch? And I'm like, no, I'm not a witch. We're socially synced in right now. So your brain is going, should I be having a drink of water too? Because he's having a drink of water.
And I was absolutely looking around my
I was watching you looking for your water. And the problem is that neurodivergent people, their mirror neurons operate at a different frequency, a different wavelength than neurotypical people. So if you're a music person, like you could say that neurotypical people are in 4/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas neurodivergent people are in 16/16 time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. They sync up every once in a while, but there's a lot of gaps between them. So it's like you're getting like every sixth word. And you're like, I'm not sure what's going on here. And it just creates this sense of confusion and dismay and being unsettled. And none of those are good internal environments to create positive relationships.
Well, I think that's so interesting about. I didn't realize that the mirror thing was part of how we got our social cues in terms of how to behave as an eighth grader versus a ninth grader versus a 10th grader versus a 12th grader. I'm really fortunate I get to be the fun aunt of a friend of mine's kids, and there's a 13-year-old in there, there's a 16-year-old in there, and so it's been fascinating kind of just watching. And I'm kind of curious, where do you think sort of, for lack of a better word, mean girl syndrome comes in? Like, what's that about?
Okay. So when people feel out of control, they control whatever they can, right? So if you are socially out of control, you're going to control the variables that are closest to you, right? So if you can get everybody marching to your drummer, if you can dictate the social milieu in your middle school or high school, then you're lowering your anxiety a lot because now everyone's looking to you for what to do, right? And if you think about the movie Mean Girls, right? Regina George doesn't become a villain until she's threatened, right? She's got Karen and, oh my gosh, I should know. I can think of the actress's name. She's got her posse who are like they're doing the grunt work for her because they're more anxious than she is. Gretchen Wieners and Karen, whatever the heck her last name is, but like they've got more to lose. So they do the grunt work. They do the pushing down because for some people, when you're on the bottom end of the popular clique, you become convinced the only way to stay there is to make sure the people below you have been pushed down. We see most bullying, most mean girl behavior from people in sort of the A minus range of the social clique. The A's and A pluses, they don't care. They have nothing to lose. They're not bothered. Right. But the A minus B plus clique, that's where we see the most tension.
Mm-hmm.
And it so happens at the bottom of the social hierarchy, the kids who are persona non grata, they don't care. They're like, whatever, you already think I'm a freak, right? But the kids who could be sucked into that black hole, they will pull anybody down below them. They're like, nope, I'm drowning, but you're going to drown first, buddy. And so that's where that's where we see the most conflict and more of that mean girl stuff, because it's about controlling things that feel uncontrollable.
And I thought it was really interesting that what you said about it being, these girls are the most anxious. And it seems like either we're talking about anxiety a lot more or, our world is a lot more anxious. It's a lot more fucked up seeming than it was when we were younger. And so I can see where there's more anxiety. But what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things going on here, right? So Deb, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I just had my birthday. I think I'm 58 or
Okay.
57.
So you're a generation above me, right? I was born in 83, so I'm 41. Um, but we both have the gift of growing up in the pre-social media world,
Mhm,
right? And the thing that was great about school for me is like, so I was badly bullied in 8th grade. Part of the reason I wrote my book is like feeling so out of sorts, I was a target. And then everybody bullied me as a way to elevate themselves. And but when I left school, that stuff didn't follow me home, right?
mm,
There was no message boards, there were no tweets, there were no memes, right? Unless they were going to call me and be mean to me, which I suppose they could have done, like I could, it was calm until I went back to school the next day. But the kids today, I mean, like not only are they plugged in on their phones, but there are so many more ways to reach somebody to bother them. And, I mean, so you can have a kid who's getting, I mean, kids who I work with now who are bullied are like, well, people just create some fake Google Voice account and have the Google Voice set to call me every 31 minutes and say nasty things to me. And that but there's no one to yell at because it's a ghost account. And I'm like, oh my, that's some like James Bond shit, right? Like, and these kids are using their powers for evil. But if somebody is being put down, at least it's not you. And that's a terrifying reality, but like we didn't have to deal with that, right? And so like now work follows us home and school follows us home and social life follows us home. And the cost of information is access, because people can access you
mhm.
and in all sorts of ways. I mean, like, can you imagine trying to send a nude picture in the 80s? You'd have to get a Polaroid, right? And like snap and then put it in the mail and like, post office, would you take this to, 337 Main Street, get there on the double, right? Like
It would
but
be a 2-week process.
it would be a 2-week process. Who knows what it would look like after 2 weeks? My God. And that's the thing that like is really like, so kids are they have to be on so much more. So
Mhm,
that's their cortisol levels, they're making them more anxious. And also this generation right now, they missed 3 years of foundational social skills, right? I mean, the kids who were on the tail end of high school during the COVID years, they were still affected, but they seem to have been relatively unscathed. But the kids I'm seeing now who are matriculating into high school, who are getting ready to graduate high school into college, I mean, socially, they're just lost. They just they didn't get those reps, because you can have the best ideas in your head, but so much of this is about meaningful practice. And those kids were robbed of 2 to 3 to 4 years of meaningful practice, right? And because you're not in the lunchroom talking to people, you're not flirting with somebody on the bus, you're not planning a sleepover, you're not sitting in your buddy's basement playing video games and talking about who's the hottest girl in your class. Like those are foundational experiences for developing somebody's psychosexual sense of self. And, you know, a lot of kids pivoted and they adapted, so they didn't get 0, but they sure as hell didn't get 100%. And
Right.
we're seeing that lag right now.
Well, and I'm curious, I heard somewhere, first of all, I think it's a really interesting way to measure it, but they're talking about how college students are having less sex, and this is a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what you think about that.
I think college students should be having all the sex they want to, right? I think that's a good thing. And I think that we're seeing some of the race to nowhere stuff in college that we saw in middle school, high school. Like, because then it was like, well, you don't have time to have a social life. You have to take 6 AP classes, do volunteer work, have a part-time job. If you could cure cancer on the side, that's how you're going to get into Yale. And now you're seeing that in college as well, where the kids are like, listen, I don't have time to go to frat parties. I can't get drunk on a Tuesday. I have to get a job,
Mm,
right? And they're getting this message where it's like, college is very expensive. Do not waste your time. Graduate in 3 years if you can. Join the workforce. And it's a race to nowhere because, like, holy shit. Like, when I think back on my college memories, I got to tell you, most of them don't involve class.
right. Well, and then on top of it, I I mean, I was fortunate. I grew up on the college campus. My dad was a professor. So I understand, for me, a lot of what I value and see as valuable about college is the socialization, is the time to explore ideas, and has nothing to do with having a job afterwards. And I know that, that used to be more of a accepted way of thinking, but somehow we've switched it on to, you know, the what is college good for and why do we need it? And I think, not to underscore the incredibly untenable way that uh the loans have come up and everything else, but it's just an interesting thing. And I love what you said about, like, oh, this was a time to do different kinds of reps.
Yeah.
um so let's talk dating.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk dating. So, what do when you're working with particularly male clients who are neurodivergent and who are having a hard time connecting with women and girls, where do you start with them?
So I think it really starts in a question of like, what are your values versus what are the values you've been told to have? Now, I think one of the luckiest things in my life is as I got into college, like we were moving ever so slowly towards like the consent is sexy era.
Hmm.
Like, I was the person, I would ask somebody if I could kiss them goodnight, right? I would ask somebody if I could walk them home. And that was a way of dealing with my social anxiety, right? I'm like, well, I don't want to like awkwardly follow this person and be turned down. I'd be like, oh, hey, so like, can I kiss you goodnight? Like, can I come upstairs with you? And like, thankfully, we've started moving to a world that consent stuff is much more normalized. It's much more out there. And frankly, it fits the neurodivergent brain a lot better because reading subtle social cues, being in the moment, reading the room are things that a lot of neurodivergent people struggle with. So, like that kind of overt, what we call meta communication, talking about talking, right, is helpful for neurodivergent people because it's like, hey, I'm sorry, are we flirting? Are we on a date? Why are you taking your shirt off? I did not expect you to take your shirt off, right? And, I remember this is a very embarrassing story. I remember in high school, there was a girl who was very popular, and she and I were working on a class project together. And like the first couple of times I came to her house and we worked on the class project, we sat at the kitchen table and did the work together. The last time I came over, she's like, "Oh, let's work in my bedroom," and then like made a big show of shutting the door. And like I was like, "Well, we have to finish this project. We have to finish the biology lab," and we finished the biology lab. And then I was like, "All right." I'll call my mom. And like the next day at school, she was super cold to me. And I was like, what the hell? And I told my best friend about it, who was much more socially apt than I was. And he was like, you're a moron. And I'm like, what? He's like, she basically locked you in her bedroom, dude. Like, what did you think was going to happen? And I was like, I don't know what was supposed to happen because, that social asynchrony, like, it did not occur to me. Like, and I'm sure she felt embarrassed because she had done basically the equivalent of like, I show up and she's laying there naked, right? Well, the same like freshman high school version of that. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, and like, I'll never get a chance to apologize to her for that. And it's one of those things like, damn, but knowing, you can't know then what you know now, but knowing that, like, to put yourself in a situation is that kind of open and honest communication about it is beneficial to everyone. Right. Because had I not been interested, and I was very interested, which really sucked, um, you know, like, then we could have had a conversation about that. But instead, it was this sort of like, well, she'd been socialized to not ask, and I hadn't been socialized enough to understand what the unspoken things were. And, I mean, so many opportunities that are sexual, romantic, even friendship are missed just because of missed signals, and you know, that's a really tricky thing to navigate.
Funny hearing you say that makes me think one of the things I like to talk about is dropping the hanky.
Yeah.
Um, and the whole idea that, like, back in the day, women had hankies and they would, like, drop the hanky. And the guy would either pick it up, he would, and hand it back to her. He would step over it and just be oblivious. She'd pick it up, she'd put a rock in it, she'd throw it. Just kidding. Um, but, there were all these signs.
Yeah.
And hearing you talk, I'm like, oh, right. As a as far as I know, a neurotypical person, like, sometimes I even have trouble with those signs. Like, I have trouble knowing what signs to give or, um, I've been with my partner for a really long time, so now it's really easy. It's like, when I say, "Hey, babe, let's put clean sheets on the bed," he gets that smile because he knows that that is an invitation.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and I would imagine that many couples develop these kinds of invitations um, and so it's a uh, yeah. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but that's a really interesting, to not have those kinds of signals from the beginning can be really tricky, and having that freedom for the conversation. I think there's a lot of people who complain about, like, "Oh, I don't wanna be asked, blah, 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 blah," but, sometimes if it's the right way, it can be pretty hot, you
Yeah.
know?
Right.
It's
Consent
like
is sexy. It really is. Right. And it gets this reputation as it's like this super nerdy, formal, like, excuse me, pursuant to this interaction, would you care to engage in sexual intercourse? Please click yes or no. Right. I mean, no, that's not sexy, but like, you know, there's there are ways to communicate about it and around it that work, that are in the rhythm of that couple and what they need. And, I think a lot of, what my partner and I talk about is not so much that we're going to have sex, but when.
Mhm.
Like, you get a date night, like, I don't know about you, like, you go out, you have, like, a big meal, you have a couple glasses of wine, like, sometimes you come back and you're tired and you're full and you're like, "I don't feel sexy right now. I feel full." And, like, so it's like, we will have sex before date night because then it's just like, "Well, that was great." And then we can go out and have date night, and then if we feel like having sex after date night, we can do that too, right? But that's, like, what I say to my clients and my friends is like, listen, this is the person you've chosen to spend the rest of your life with, or people you've, right. Let's include our polyamorous friends here. And like, so if you can't ask these questions to that person or these people, then what the fuck are we doing? Right. Like, people get so anxious to talk about sex, both asking and receiving questions about it. But when we normalize that as a part of process, like I'm going to the grocery store, do we need anything? Like, hey, we haven't had sex in a while. Should we have some sex? It is really just taking the temperature of the relationship, and it can feel as normalized as what do you need from the store, right? And that, but the benefit is not that, oh, cool, I got eggs. The benefit is, oh, cool, I had sex, right? And that's just so much more reinforcing.
That's so good. And I love what you're saying about normalizing because, it's like I think we don't say something because we're so afraid of getting an answer, right? It's going to be, if it's a no, it can be really disappointing. And sometimes if it's a yes, it's like, holy shit, now what?
Yeah.
But like normalizing the idea of just making offers and making requests and having them be just like you said, can I get you something from the store? Or would you like that extra cup of coffee? Um, I want to go back for just a second because, part of the reason I reached out to you is one of the people that I was working with was, I think he said he had ADHD.
Mhm.
And I honestly, worked with him a couple of times and was like, wow, this is not my wheelhouse. And so I'm kind of curious, like and for me, what was like, for me, what was difficult is some of the things that I would normally say, like, feel your feet on the ground and let's slow you down. And you know, are you actually hearing and responding? Like, just that was not part of, I couldn't get him there. So
Yeah.
it started making me think, and so it made me curious, like, what what kinds of advice would you give to, folks that are just really fast,
Yeah.
in that way?
The w- One of the things you can do is own your fastness, right? Like it's like my brain is jumping like 7 steps ahead in this conversation, and it's because I'm really excited, right? Let me slow down. Let me go back to step one, right? And and just naming that, bringing that process into the conversation can be so helpful to people because like you don't know what's going on between my ears, right? You don't know if I'm zoned out. You don't know if I'm looking at the hot girl across the bar. You don't know if I have like if you sicken me. But if my brain is like, okay, so we can have one more drink, and then I'm going to ask her to come back to my place, and after I come back to my place, what movie should we watch on Netflix? Because we have to pretend to watch a movie, and then we're going to do this, and then like, oh my sheet's clean. Oh my gosh, it's like, and she's like, "I'm sorry, I asked if you wanted to have pretzels." And you're like, "What?" You know, so your brain can really just sort of, you know, get so sped up you miss the basics, right?
Mm.
And like, where I was watching the figure skating thing with my kids the other day, and my daughter was like, "How do I learn how to do that triple spinny jump thing?" I'm like, "Well, you have to go to hockey practice. So you have to learn to skate first." She's like, "But that's boring. I don't want to do that." I'm like, "Well, it is boring, but it's boring now. It will become basic as you do it, right?" And I one of the things I'm fond of saying is that confidence builds competence and competence builds confidence. So
Yeah.
wherever you start in that loop, right? Like, okay, I am competent. Like one of my kids, like his girlfriend from campus coming to visit, and he geared up his courage and he asked his best female friend, he said, "Can I borrow a bra? Because I need to learn how to practice how to take a bra off." And she was like, "You are such a nerd, but sure." And so like he practiced. And when that moment came, he had facility where they were right, and it's the sort of thing he was stressed out about. I was like, well, you've got a resource to solve that problem, right? And, you know, and like that's why I tell my kids like masturbation's a healthy thing because you're learning what you like and you're learning what you don't like. And then you can communicate that to a partner or partners because the odds are they don't know any more about what they're doing than you do. Right? Like, well, where do I touch what and what does what where go in the who in the he da? Right? So like understanding what lights your fire and understanding what turns you off are vital pieces to having a healthy sex life. And what better way to practice than with yourself?
Oh, that's so good. So, what I'm really hearing is that a big part of the work that you do with folks is helping them to understand themselves, helping them to understand, like, oh, wow, I do this thing. And so, if I catch myself doing the thing, here's another thing that I can maybe do to actually be present and to be more connected to the person that I'm with.
Yeah.
And
Thing.
competence, I love that. The confidence competency piece, that's pretty awesome. So, in terms of like, where do you suggest that as a neurodivergent person, like how do you suggest that people navigate the dating world? Like, do you suggest they hop on apps? Are you like go to live events? Like, where do you suggest folks start?
Well, so the apps can be very helpful for neurodivergent people because it it cuts out a lot of the stuff that makes this hard for us.
Hmm.
You know, like well, if someone is on the app, then their reasons for being here are made explicit, or at least they're loudly implied. Like nobody goes on Tinder to find out like, hey, anybody know the best bakery in Soho? Like, you don't go on Tinder for that, right? Like, so the idea with the apps is it sort of normalizes why we're all here, right? And it can make the conversation a little bit more overt and a little bit more helpful and thus more accessible. So that's a good thing.
Hmm.
If you are meeting people IRL, right? Then what I tell my clients is lead with your interests because your interests are the best version of you, right? So if you are a LARPer, live action role play, then I want you to go to a live action role play event because I'm not saying that you're going to find your significant other or others there, but you are much more likely to find good relationships there. And if you leave that with a couple of people to call on a Friday to hang out, that you've gotten that much closer to having the kind of relationships you want because good people tend to hang out with good people. And maybe they have a barbecue in a couple of months. And maybe, your friend from LARP brings her friend from the office and golly gee, she's pretty. Right. And so what you're doing is you're building a social network that offers you access to lots of lots of doors you wouldn't otherwise open. Right. We depend on each other for connections. Right. And that's, if there's a good thing about social media, it's when you connect with somebody, it's like, oh, here are the connections I have in common. I wonder which one of these connections brought us together. And that's a very cool thing. So, I really
That's a great opening line as well.
yeah, it absolutely is, right? And, so like lean into those moments, right? So lead with your interests. And like, you may think, well, like, but, nobody dates people that they meet at Mahjong or, or my Latin class or, my adult choir. Maybe not, right? But good people beget good people. You've got people to hang out with. You've got people to practice your social skills on. And, maybe down the line, they're like, hey, we need some people to play on our softball team or our kickball team, or like we're all going away to this lake house, right? It just people give you opportunities for things. And that is becoming a theater kid in high school. Like I went from like, how the hell does one meet a girl to have a girlfriend with to like, oh, I'm now surrounded by all these girls and they're all very limber. They're all very good dancers. Right. And like, it just was like, oh, here is a large group of girls that I could potentially date because I spend a lot of time with them and we clearly have some stuff in common. Right.
Mhm.
And that is not a bad thing. Right. But just we become so desperate to get to the finish line. It's that race to the end that, and, I think that it turns a lot of people off because, I mean, honestly, is there anything less sexy than desperation?
Not that I
Right.
can think of.
So like, so like I tell people, it's like, listen, take your time. It's absolutely worth it to invest in the relationships that someday get you to the relationship, you know? And like, I remember when I lived in Philadelphia, my best friend joined this all male singing group called the Orpheus Club. And it's the oldest all male singing group in the Northeast or something like that. And he was like, "This is just something to do." Like, he's like, "I don't know, like, I can't find a girlfriend. I'm a good singer. It's very fancy. Why not, right? I'm gonna do this. I joined a fraternity in college. I'll do this." And then it turns out that they had these rip-roaring parties in their clubhouse, and a lot of eligible women from Philadelphia came to these parties because you had to have a certain amount of money in your paycheck to join this singing club. And yes, these attractive women would show up at the parties, and all of a sudden he's like, "Oh my god, and I'm cool in this space because, like, I'm singing in this choir, and here's our awesome clubhouse in a really cool part of the city, and these girls are all dolled up and they wanna talk to me." So it became this, like, what a weird way to meet girls, but it absolutely worked. I couldn't do that because I can't sing my way out of a paper bag, but, but you find your version of that.
And when would you suggest that you tell somebody that you are neurodivergent?
I mean, it's funny. The research on this shows that, like, the process of coming out as neurodivergent is very similar to the process of coming out as LGBTQ, right? There are environments that are safe and affirming for that, and there are environments that are not safe, right? So, and it's a process you have to come out a lot, just like, as ADHD or gifted, just as you'd have to come out as bi or trans or whatever that might be. So, you know, I think that if you're in the right environments, that stuff is more normalized. It's more part of the environment. Like, if you go to a Mensa meeting, if you're a gifted kid like me, well, like, everybody at Mensa is gifted. Like, so you don't have to really worry about that. Or if you go to, say, Dungeons and Dragons meetup, like, there's a lot of Dungeons and Dragons clubs for adults now because D&D is very popular, and I think that's awesome, right? There's a lot more neurodivergence that's sort of overt there. LARPing, very similar community, right? Theater, choirs, those are things where you're drawing a certain type of people. But if you meet somebody in the cafeteria line at the office, like, then I think your coming out as neurodivergent is relevant to the extent to which you want them to understand you,
Hmm.
right? And so, like I have like, a lot of neurodivergent people have sensory issues, right? Like, I can't, that sound that styrofoam makes when it rubs together is like, it's like my brain explodes. It's the worst, right? So, if I remember, I was talking to a girl at a baby shower once, and they were opening a present, and, like, we were having a very flirtatious conversation, and somebody opened a kid's toy that was in that styrofoam stuff, and I was like, like, it looked like I got tasered, and she was like, "What did you?" I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I have a really tough time with the styrofoam noise." And she was like, and she was clearly put off by that, right? She's like, "Oh, I thought this was this cool, normal guy, and he is neither of those things." I was like, "Well, it's your fault that you thought I was cool." No, I'm not cool. I've never been cool, right? Um, and, like, she excused herself, and I felt like an asshole, right? Like, I was like, "Oh, man," like, so, but, there's no way I could have anticipated that happening. And this gets back to the idea. It's like, we want the people in our lives to love us because of our differences, not in spite of them,
And
you
just
know?
out of curiosity, where did you meet your wife?
So I met her on the first day of grad school, and to get our doctorates in clinical psychology. And I remember meeting her and shaking her hand, thinking to myself, "Well, that's convenient." Um, Took her a little longer to get there, but, um, and it's funny because we were both dating other people at the time, and she was in a long relationship, and I was in a short, what the kids call today, a situationship. Um, you know, but it was the sort of thing, like, we were on a collision course, and you think about all the decisions that have to happen in order for that meeting to take place. I mean, that's why it's a miracle you meet anybody, right? And, like, whether you put that in God or the universe or math, right? It's just whatever it might be. but like it's damn remarkable, right? And like I don't think my wife is my soulmate. I don't think we were destined to meet. An astronomical number of decisions, many of which were completely out of our control, had to happen in order for us to meet. But since the universe put her in my path, you better believe I'm going to take advantage of that. I'm going to, marry her and check, and have some kids with her, check, and live that best life we can, check, right? Like that's what I'm going to do, right? So, you know, I think if you put yourself in situations that are aligned with your values and interests, you will meet the people and be given the opportunities that will just make your life closer to what you want it to be,
Hmm.
and that is it really is about trusting the process, right? If you are leading with your values, you're never going to steal yourself wrong.
I love hearing that. So, in a minute, I am going to ask you to talk a little bit more about the playbook. But first, I want to give people an opportunity to know how they can support the Better Sex podcast. Because, as good as a podcast is, it may not have all the answers. And sex is kind of a complex subject. And it's not one that most of us grow up talking about at the breakfast table.
Yeah.
And so I like to offer a bedroom sexual mastery breakthrough session. And this is a one-on-one session. And you bring the questions, I bring the answers. And we can talk about anything your heart desires, including what your heart desires. So please check out the show notes. There is a link to have a sexual mastery breakthrough session. Because honestly, life is too short for bad sex and unsatisfactory relationships. So tell me a little bit more about the playbook. What inspired it? What do you think? What do you think? Who's it for? What's it for? Tell me more.
Oh, so I pitched it to my publisher as, this is a book for anybody who works with or loves someone who's neurodivergent. And she goes, that's a great title. And then she thought first, she's like, wait, that's everybody. I'm like, that's the point, right? So, if 20% of the world is neurodivergent, the other 80% has to deal with that 20%, right? And the 20% of neurodivergence has to deal with the 80% that's neurotypical. I don't need anybody to mask. I don't need anybody to sell themselves out to go along to get along. But the idea is, like, if you can't crack that code, you can code switch, right? In a podcast format, I'm a lot more professional. I'm a lot more dialed in than I would be if I was just talking to my buddies, right? If we were just shooting the shit over a beer. But this particular podcast is a little bit more chill than some of the other ones I've been on. So I'm a little bit looser here. I'm code switching. I'm stepping into a space to communicate in a very particular way to get a very particular outcome. When people contact me to come speak to their organization, that is the most neurotypical version of me. I'm like, yes, I can give that talk to you. And yes, this is how much I charge. And yes, this is a good thing I can do. And I will fly there and I will stay in a hotel and I will do all these things. But when I get off that call, I've got to sort of burn off the energy I spent masking my nerdy, geeky, ADHD gifted self. So I'm like, bah, I'm going to go watch cartoons, right? Like, so like, and however you release that authentic self, right? For some people, it's by sex, right? Some people, you have a long day at the office, pretending to be somebody you're not. You come home and you're like, honey, let's get in bed, right? And we'll order in a pizza if we need it. Like, that's fine. Like, however you de-stress and decompress, because the world is sometimes at best uncaring and at worst actively aggressive towards neurodivergent people. We often don't fit,
Hmm.
and that means that we can be ostracized. It means we can be excluded. It can mean there's a lot of invisible psychological cost to being neurodivergent. And writing this book is like, let me name a lot of that stuff. Let me give you some practical strategies that help you close that gap. and step into the space where being a neurodivergent person doesn't feel like a burden. It just feels like like this is who I am. And sometimes I have to slip on my Clark Kent costume, right? If I'm Superman, right? And I got to go to work. I got to go to the Daily Planet, right? But I get to come home to Lois Lane at the end of the day, and that's not the worst thing in the world. And I think it's a powerful way to do that, because I know it's a lot of the stuff I've struggled with, and having seen hundreds, if not thousands of therapy clients over the years, I know that's what a lot of my clients say to me. Like, and that shows up at work, it shows up in family, it shows up in relationships, and it definitely shows up in sex and dating. Like, how do I be the most authentic version of me? How do I have the courage to be vulnerable and authentic in a world that tells me, be like everybody else or you're going to be left behind, right? So I called it the playbook, because I'm like, let me get you from A to Z, because I think I can.
Beautiful. And what a gift. I mean, hearing you say those things about like the code switch or having to mask, if you will, and show up in a certain way. And I think everybody, at least I certainly have that experience. And, the beauty of what I'm really hearing and what I really appreciate is it's like, yeah, I'm out of the box.
Mhm.
And there's other people who are out of the box who want to come play with me. And so how do we find each other? And how do we, when we have to step into the box, how do we play the box? Right? Because I think, really learning how to play the box is as important as learning how to play outside.
Yeah.
So how can we find you? How can we have more of you?
So I'm chronically online. So there's two parts of my professional identity. So I often describe it as this: like, if you think you need therapy for you, right? If you want to talk to me about you, then it's the neurodiversitycollective.com. That's our therapy practice. We have 5 practitioners and me who are all very neurodivergent and affirming. We call it the Neurodiversity Collective because we see everybody, right? You don't have to be neurodivergent to see us. But that's like, if it's one-on-one, that's the place to go. If you think my message makes sense for your organization, whether it's a school or a community organization or a Fortune 500 company, then that's drmattzakreski.com. That's, my speaking consulting arm. I try and keep those two parts of the business separate because I want to, I help different people in different ways. So yeah, it's either the neurodiversitycollective.com or drmattzakreski.com. And if you end up in one instead of the other, trust me, we'll help you either way.
And are you a social media guy now?
I'm big on Facebook. It's facebook.com/drmattzakreski. Also instagram.com/drmattzakreski. I was going to roll out a TikTok, and then TikTok got banned, and then I got unbanned. So I guess I'm still doing that. And I have a Vimeo page where you can see some of the talks I've given. That's a great way to get a sense of my style and my content.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Matt. I am thrilled to have you here. It's been a really fun conversation. And please follow him. Like, this is an incredible resource we have right here. And again, thank you for your time and your effort. And if you are listening and you know somebody or some buddies who could be helped by listening and hearing this podcast, please pass it on. Like, subscribe, and share us with your friends. So thank you so much, and see you again soon.
Thank you.